What if I told you that everything you've been praying for, every breakthrough, every provision, every answer, is already on its way and could arrive in the next 7 minutes? Not next year, not someday, but now. The question isn't whether God will send it. The real question is, will you recognize it when it comes, or miss it entirely because it didn't look like you expected? When God speaks of time, He does not speak as we do. We measure in seconds, minutes, and hours. We live by schedules, alarms, and deadlines. But the divine operates in eternity. Time to Him is not a line but a canvas, stretched out and folded, infinite and yet immediate. So when we hear a phrase like, "Your wealth will arrive in 7 minutes," the human mind rushes to calculate. We check our watches, mark the countdown, expect something to fall from the sky or appear in our accounts. But that is not how the hand of God typically moves. The idea that heaven's timing is not man's timing is not just poetic. It is truth forged through experience. All through Scripture and life, we find examples of divine timing that defied human logic. The Israelites wandered for 40 years for a promise that could have taken days. Lazarus was left in the tomb, not because Christ had forgotten him, but because a greater glory was meant to be revealed. Abraham waited nearly a century for a promised son, not because God was slow, but because eternity was crafting something that the human timeline could not rush. We tend to think that a delay is a denial. We grow anxious when something does not arrive immediately. We say to ourselves, if it hasn't happened by now, it never will. But what if the promise is not late? What if it is merely on God's clock, not ours? The heavens do not submit to our calendars. God is never hurried, never pressured, never surprised. And yet, He is never late. The notion of 7 minutes is symbolic, a divine nudge rather than a mechanical stopwatch. It is a test of expectation and trust. It challenges the believer to stay alert, to live with anticipation that something is already on its way. Because in the spiritual realm, when God declares something, it already exists. His word does not wait for conditions to align. His word creates the conditions. The moment He speaks it, it begins unfolding. But the problem is not with the timing of God. It is with the perception of man. We cannot often see what is being woven behind the veil. We only see absence, but God sees preparation. We see nothing happening, but God sees everything aligning. He is arranging circumstances, softening hearts, moving people, opening opportunities. The delay you perceive is the mercy of heaven, giving you time to grow into what you are asking for. Because often, the blessing is ready before the person is. What use is a crown if the head is too weak to carry it? When God says your wealth will arrive, He means something deeper than gold. And when He adds, in 7 minutes, He invites us to trust Him, not the second hand. He is not merely concerned with getting things to you. He is also concerned with getting you ready for them. And so the clock ticks not just on the blessing's arrival, but on your own transformation. You are being timed too, not for judgment, but for readiness. God is not bound to minutes, but He does love to use moments. In His grace, He may choose a specific moment in your life that feels ordinary, but is laced with eternal weight. A conversation, a thought, a small act of obedience may be the doorway to wealth unimaginable. And so when He says, wait 7 minutes, He may also be saying, watch your heart. Are you watching the clock, or watching the clouds of heaven forming something on the horizon? Are you demanding answers, or are you preparing yourself to receive whatever form the blessing might take? Because sometimes what arrives is not a gift, but a glimpse into a future you didn't think was possible, a glimpse into yourself no longer chained to fear, a glimpse into God's character, revealing how precise His mercy is. God's timing is not man's timing, because man sees the surface and God sees the seed. Man sees the empty plate, and God sees the feast being prepared in the next room. Man watches the hourglass run out, and God waits until it is completely empty, only then to flip it and start something new. So when you hear the phrase, "Your wealth will arrive in 7 minutes," understand it is not a riddle or a tease. It is a call to faith. It is heaven's way of saying, "Stay with me a little longer." What you're hoping for is already moving in your direction, just not on your watch, but mine. When people hear the word wealth, their minds often jump to numbers, currency in the bank, cars in the driveway, houses on the hill. The world has trained us to think of wealth in physical and material terms. But when God speaks of wealth, His definition stretches far beyond the reach of gold or the weight of silver. The wealth of heaven is broader, deeper, and far more enduring than any currency earth can mint. What He offers is not only to bless your hands, but to heal your soul, shape your mind, and restore what was broken within you. Material wealth, in God's perspective, is a shadow of greater things. It is not the ultimate gift, but rather a tool. Useful, yes, but never the final destination. There are people who have overflowing bank accounts, but are bankrupt in peace, joy, love, and purpose. They can buy experiences but not meaning. They can afford luxury but not contentment. This reveals the fragile nature of earthly riches. They rust, decay, and vanish. They are stolen, taxed, and fought over. But the wealth of God, when it arrives, comes wrapped in eternity. It is secure. It multiplies not just in quantity, but in quality, affecting every dimension of your life. To understand divine wealth, you must look at the gifts that cannot be measured. Consider peace, genuine peace that is not dependent on external conditions. A peace that allows you to walk through storms without trembling. That is wealth. Or wisdom, the kind that gives you insight when others are confused, direction when others are lost. This is a treasure more valuable than gold, because it keeps you from ruin. Then there's favor, where doors open not because of your resume, but because of God's hand. Or restoration, where years you thought were wasted are redeemed in a moment. These are not small things. These are the quiet empires being built inside of you when you follow God's voice. Sometimes, the wealth He sends arrives as relationships, divinely orchestrated connections that shape your destiny. One person entering your life at the right moment can open more doors than years of striving. Or perhaps the wealth comes in the form of healing, when a body is restored, or when a bitter heart becomes soft again. These things don't make headlines, but they make life worth living. And often, they are the very things people spend their lives chasing in vain, not realizing that what they are truly seeking cannot be bought. When God says, "Your wealth will arrive," it is important not to limit that promise to money. God does not deal in shallow transactions. He deals in transformation. And so, wealth might come as an idea, a spark in the mind that leads to a business, a mission, a movement. Or it might come as a gift of endurance in a season of testing, where you emerge stronger than you entered. Wealth might even arrive as contentment. the ability to truly enjoy what you already have, without the aching hunger for more. The world cannot understand that kind of wealth, but the soul recognizes it as treasure. To receive this wealth, you must also redefine your desires. If you only expect paper, you might miss the gold of patience, the silver of humility, the diamonds of faith and trust. These are not metaphors. These are the currencies of the kingdom. They are what enable you to live above fear, above scarcity, above competition. They give you an identity that is not shaken by what the world gives or takes away. This is the kind of wealth that allows a person to live with open hands, knowing that even if everything is stripped away, the soul remains rich. In truth, God may choose to give you material wealth as well. He is not opposed to abundance. But when He gives, He does so with purpose. He gives to stewards, not hoarders. He gives so that the blessing may multiply, flow, nourish others. When your heart aligns with His, you find that wealth becomes less about what you can keep and more about what you can release. It becomes less about lifestyle and more about legacy. So when He says your wealth is coming, prepare for more than money. Prepare to be expanded, not just rewarded. Prepare to carry something eternal, not just something expensive. Because the wealth of God, when it comes, touches not only your hands but your heart, your mind, your relationships, your purpose. It enriches you where the world cannot reach and where time cannot steal. Blessings from God are often not missed because they are absent, but because they are misunderstood. We are a people trained by noise and spectacle, and in our search for signs and wonders, we often overlook the quiet fingerprints of God. There is a strange tragedy in the human soul that makes it prone to dismiss anything that does not come wrapped in glamour or grandeur. When we think of God answering a prayer or delivering a blessing, we imagine it will be loud, dramatic, instantly recognizable. But the nature of divine blessing is subtle, and its entry into our lives often comes dressed in ordinary clothes. The scriptures and the stories of the faithful across generations reveal a pattern. God speaks softly, He moves gently, and He hides treasure in places that the hurried or distracted will never look. He told Elijah to watch for Him, not in the wind, not in the earthquake, not in the fire, but in the still small voice. That quiet whisper carried more power than all the chaos that preceded it. This same principle applies to how blessings arrive. They don't always come through flashes of brilliance or storms of provision. Sometimes a blessing is hidden in the delay. Sometimes it is tucked into an inconvenient moment, a difficult person, or a sudden loss. But we miss it because we weren't paying attention. We were looking for something else. We expected the answer to take a shape we had already imagined. And when it did not come that way, we assumed it hadn't come at all. God may have already placed a divine opportunity in your path. A connection, an idea, a prompting, a shift in desire. And because it didn't shine the way you thought it would, you walked past it. The blessing was there, but it required recognition, not assumption. One of the reasons God's blessings require recognition is because they are often wrapped in responsibility. A new opportunity might look like more pressure at first. A life-changing relationship may start as a simple conversation. A financial breakthrough may come as a small idea requiring effort and faith to develop. But if we are not spiritually awake, if we are not listening with more than our ears and watching with more than our eyes, we will treat the sacred as common. We will despise the seed because we expected a tree. Many blessings arrive in seed form. They need cultivation, nurturing, patience. The world teaches us to look for fruit, but heaven sometimes sends seeds first, and the tragedy is that, when we don't see the fruit immediately, we throw away the seed. A conversation that could have led to healing is brushed off. An urge to change a habit is silenced. A moment of inspiration is ignored. And so, the soil of our lives remains barren. Not because God didn't send the blessing, but because we didn't recognize its form. To recognize a blessing is to live with sensitivity to God's voice. To be tuned not just to what is happening around us, but to what is stirring within us. It requires a posture of humility, where we stop telling God how to bless us and start asking Him to help us see what He's already doing. When you train your spirit to look for God's fingerprints in every moment, you begin to realize He is always near, always active, always speaking. Some of the greatest breakthroughs begin with things so small, so mundane, that only a heart attuned to God would catch them. An encouraging word from a stranger, a random invitation, a sudden moment of stillness that pulls you into prayer. These are not coincidences. They are brushstrokes of the divine on the canvas of your life. But they do not announce themselves. They must be seen through spiritual eyes. There is a humility in being able to say, "This might be from God, even if I don't fully understand it yet." That humility opens the door to greater blessings. When you start seeing ordinary moments as potential vessels of divine intention, your entire life becomes rich with possibility. You stop missing what is right in front of you. You begin to catch what others overlook. You start responding instead of complaining. And you find, often to your surprise, that the blessing you've been praying for was already there, waiting to be noticed, waiting to be received. God hides His treasures not to keep them from you, but to draw you closer. He wants you to come near, to listen more deeply, to slow down and look again. The blessing has not passed you by. It may already be within reach. But only the eyes of faith, sharpened by trust and softened by humility, will be able to see it clearly. Faith is not just a virtue. It is the language of heaven, the unseen bridge that connects the promises of God with the realities of our lives. In the kingdom of God, faith is the currency by which we receive what has already been spoken over us. While the world trades in effort, influence, and logic, the spiritual realm operates on belief. And belief, true belief, is not passive agreement but active trust. It is the willingness to step towards something that is not yet visible, to build a life upon a word rather than a guarantee. When God says, "Your wealth will arrive," it is faith that receives it, even when the hands are still empty. It is faith that thanks Him before the evidence appears, that praises in the silence, that obeys before the result is certain. This is not delusion. It is alignment. Faith is the alignment of the soul with the will and timing of God. It says, "I may not see it yet, but I know who spoke it." And in that knowing, something powerful happens. The promise begins to manifest in the natural, because it has already taken root in the heart. Without faith, we cannot access what has been placed within our reach. It is not that God is unwilling. It is that He will not pour eternal riches into vessels that are closed by doubt. A lack of faith is like a sealed jar during rainfall. The water falls freely, but none is gathered. God often sends the blessing, but faith is the cup we hold out to catch it. And not just any cup. Faith that is rooted in trust, not entitlement, faith that is persistent, not convenient, faith that believes in both God's power and His goodness. The world teaches us to rely on what we can see, what we can prove, what can be backed by data and reason. But God often invites us into situations that defy all natural explanation. He calls us into moments where logic fails so that we may learn to lean entirely on Him. The blessings He sends are often preceded by a test. Will you still believe when it looks like nothing is happening? Will you still obey when the instructions seem strange? Will you still move when everything around you is still? This kind of faith is not always loud. Sometimes it looks like quiet endurance. Sometimes it is found in the person who refuses to give up even when the world has moved on. Sometimes it is the prayer whispered for the 1,000th time, the act of generosity offered when resources are low, the decision to stand when it would be easier to walk away. Faith is not a feeling, it is a choice. It is chosen again and again, especially when the results are delayed. Faith also requires a reorientation of the heart. It requires us to trust in the character of God even more than in the outcome we desire. Because if we only trust God for what He can give us, we are not walking in faith, we are negotiating. But when we trust Him simply because we know Him, even when the path is unclear and the waiting is long, that is the kind of faith that pleases Him. That is the faith that draws heaven to earth. The currency of faith is also deeply relational. It is not about mustering up inner strength or pretending to be strong. It is about intimacy. The more you know someone, the easier it is to trust them. And so the deepest faith is born not out of striving, but out of fellowship. Time in God's presence strengthens faith, because it reminds you of who He is. You begin to see that He has never failed, that His timing is always perfect, that His plans are always higher. This kind of faith becomes a way of life. It shapes how you speak, how you wait, how you make decisions. It governs your response to both blessings and battles. When the word comes, your wealth will arrive. You do not rush to prove it or force it. You prepare to receive it by activating faith. You speak with expectation. You act in alignment. You remove the doubts that crowd your mind. You hold fast to what you heard, even when you don't yet see it. Because the delay is not denial. It is often the space where faith matures and strengthens. And when that faith is complete, when it has been refined in waiting and tested by silence, it becomes the vessel God uses to deliver what He has always intended to give. When God says, "Your wealth will arrive in 7 minutes," it is more than a statement of timing. It is a divine invitation into trust, attention, and obedience. The specific mention of 7 minutes may seem arbitrary or symbolic, but in the spiritual realm, numbers and moments carry weight. God is precise even when He seems silent. He doesn't speak in riddles to confuse us, but in mystery to deepen our dependence on Him. A promise set in time, even as brief as 7 minutes, becomes a test not only of faith but of posture, of how we wait, how we watch, and how we listen. Those 7 minutes become sacred space. They are not ordinary passing time. They carry the weight of expectation, the tension of hope and uncertainty. And during those minutes, something begins to happen, not just around us, but within us. Heaven may have already begun to move the moment the word was spoken. But those minutes are more for the transformation of the recipient than for the delivery of the blessing. We often think of waiting as wasted time, but in God's economy, waiting is working. Waiting refines. Waiting reveals. Waiting draws out the true condition of our hearts. This kind of moment is not passive. It is not the kind of waiting where one simply sits and does nothing. It is watchful. It is prayerful. It is alert. The same way a servant waits by the door listening for the master's footsteps, or a bride waits at the altar prepared for the bridegroom. This divine waiting is full of expectation. It requires spiritual ears that are attuned to even the softest sounds of movement. Because the blessing might not arrive with thunder, it might arrive as a whisper, as a gentle nudge, as a sudden sense of peace that settles into the room without warning. But not everyone hears it. Not everyone sees it. Many people walk through those symbolic 7 minutes distracted, impatient, irritated. They check the clock, not the spirit. They tap their fingers, not their hearts. They demand evidence before the time is up. And in doing so, they often miss what was being given. Because the 7 minutes are not only about delivery. They are also about discernment. God is watching how you respond before the breakthrough, how you posture your soul before the answer arrives. Do you trust Him enough to be still, to believe, to praise in advance? Or do you allow doubt to steal what faith could have carried? The testing embedded in divine waiting does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it's a test of attention. Are you present in this moment? Or are you distracted by fear and what-ifs? Sometimes it's a test of gratitude. Can you thank God now, before you hold anything in your hands? Sometimes it's a test of obedience. Will you follow a quiet instruction, even if it seems unrelated to the blessing you're expecting? God often watches how we handle small moments before releasing big ones. He's not just preparing the blessing for us. He's preparing us for the blessing. It is in this kind of sacred delay that deeper spiritual work happens. The heart is softened. Pride is broken. Fear is exposed. Sometimes those 7 minutes are a mirror, showing us whether we really believe what we claim to believe. And often, it is in that space of humble waiting that God deposits something even greater than the original promise. He may give you wisdom while you wait for provision. He may give you healing while you wait for answers. He may deepen your intimacy with Him, which becomes a treasure far richer than anything you thought you needed. What we think is a short moment of time can become a divine appointment, a holy furnace where purity is forged, where trust is tested, and where dependence on God replaces self-reliance. When we learn to wait well, we learn to walk with God, because to wait on Him is to honor His timing, His methods, and His voice above our own impulses. And once we pass through the test of the 7 minutes, those seemingly small windows of waiting, we begin to understand that every moment with God is intentional. Nothing is wasted. Not a breath, not a tear, not a second. Everything is measured, everything is meaningful, and everything is moving toward His promise, even when all we can do is stand and believe. When God declares that a blessing is on its way, it carries with it a sacred responsibility, the readiness to receive. Yet often, when that blessing does not arrive in the form or timing we expected, we ignore it. We walk past it, we dismiss it. And in doing so, we invite delay, not because God is reluctant to bless us, but because we are not spiritually aligned to recognize or steward what He is offering. Ignoring a blessing is not always a conscious rebellion. More often, it is the product of distraction, pride, fear, or unbelief. It is rooted in the assumption that God must bless us our way, in our style, according to our vision, or not at all. Many people cry out for breakthrough, and then miss it when it comes dressed in responsibility or disguised as disruption. A new opportunity arrives but demands more discipline, and they say, "This can't be from God." A chance meeting stirs something deep within them, but they are too preoccupied to engage. A sudden pull toward stillness and prayer might be the very voice of God calling them into something greater, but they silence it because it doesn't fit their expectation. God doesn't always shout. He often whispers, and when we are too loud in our own minds or too rigid in our expectations, we cannot hear him. The human heart is quick to overlook the divine when it is not wrapped in drama. The Pharisees saw Jesus, the very embodiment of the promised Messiah, and yet missed him entirely because he did not arrive in the glory they imagined. He did not fit the mold. This is not just a historical tragedy, it is a pattern that repeats in everyday life. God offers answers, deliverance, direction, and provision through unexpected means, and many fail to notice. They ask for guidance, but ignore the quiet conviction pulling at their conscience. They ask for favor, but reject the difficult decision that would lead them toward it. They ask for open doors, but walk past the very ones God gently nudged open for them. The delay that follows is not punishment, it is mercy. It is God giving us another chance to pay attention, to tune in, to align our posture with his plan. But every time we delay obedience, we delay manifestation. Every time we dismiss his voice, we reset the process. Not because God withdraws his promises, but because he refuses to force them onto unprepared hands. Blessings are not only gifts, they are assignments. And assignments demand maturity, focus, and humility. If we cannot recognize a blessing in its seed form, we will not know how to nurture it into fruit. Spiritual delay is often less about God's withholding and more about our missing. He may have already sent what you asked for, but it required something from you: faith, movement, conversation, silence, surrender, and you ignored it. So he waits. He is patient but purposeful. He does not give cheaply what cost him greatly. He wants you to see it, value it, and be changed by it. Because every true blessing from God is not just about increase. It is about transformation. If you receive the provision but stay unchanged, you've missed the deeper work. To recognize and respond to God's blessings, we must cultivate spiritual sensitivity. That means clearing the noise. That means surrendering our need to control how God answers. That means living each day with open hands and attentive hearts. It means believing that he is speaking, always moving, always revealing, even when we cannot trace the outline. It means treating each interruption, each encounter, each inner tug as potentially sacred. Because the blessing we ask for is often wrapped in the very things we overlook. This is why Jesus so often said, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear." The hearing he referred to was not physical. It was spiritual. It was about posture, not perception. It was about the heart's willingness to be interrupted by God's unexpected ways. When we ignore those interruptions, we delay our own breakthrough. When we delay obedience, we prolong the wilderness. When we dismiss the simple as insignificant, we miss the holy hiding inside it. God's blessings are too precious to be handed to a distracted soul. He waits not because he's punishing, but because he's inviting. Inviting us to listen again, to look again, to remember that his ways are not ours. That his wealth may come in a form that tests before it blesses, that challenges before it rewards. And when we finally stop ignoring what he's doing, When we truly open our eyes to the quiet ways He moves, we find that the blessing was never far away. It was simply waiting for us to notice. In the end, the message woven through every word of this promise, "Your wealth will arrive in 7 minutes," is not about sudden fortune, but about divine alignment. It is a call to awaken your spirit, to see beyond what is visible, and to trust that God's timing, though mysterious, is perfect. Wealth in God's eyes is not limited to material gain, but includes peace, wisdom, purpose, relationships, healing, and favor, gifts far richer than gold. But these blessings are not always loud. They are often subtle, requiring faith to receive, vision to recognize, and obedience to steward. The symbolic 7 minutes are not merely about waiting. They are about watching, listening, preparing, and responding. Those who rush, who doubt, who look only for the obvious, may miss what heaven is pouring out. But those who wait with expectation, who walk by faith and not by sight, will see that the blessing was always on its way. God does not withhold good things from His children. He waits for them to be ready to receive. So do not ignore the whisper, the seed, the small door. Do not delay what God has set in motion. Your wealth is not far. It is unfolding even now. Watch closely, listen deeply, and prepare your heart, because what God has spoken will surely arrive.